All right. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Hi, Fran. I'm good.
I'm very good, thank you. And today I think we have a very interesting conversation because we done a research a couple of weeks ago regarding what the COOs or what keeps the COOs up at night.
Yeah.
And one of the topics that came up, and very interestingly, is not exclusive for manufacturing, but actually across industries, is throughput. And
Mm.
because particularly when it's about systems, um, many times one of the biggest concerns is wh- what we have to do, why we have to change when it should serve us rather than we serving the systems.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some thoughts on throughput. In fact, it's the foundational concern for my workflow engine and
Right.
for the design of a lot of elements in Trinity.
Yeah.
Now, throughput from a manufacturing perspective, a lot of people relate it to that,
Yeah.
right? Meaning that you've got a manufacturing process, and throughput is, the process of generating your outcome, right?
Right.
Whatever it is that you're manufacturing, and the various steps in there. Okay, that's your manufacturing flow. But it also applies outside of manufacturing to the broader concept of workflow.
Right.
Okay. And this is where you find all sorts of bottlenecks and miscommunications and responsibility distribution, et
Yeah.
cetera. And that can apply to everything from your purchasing processes to your maintenance processes, inspection processes, incident management processes. Basically, all of these businessy things
Yeah.
have some sort of a workflow to them, right?
Right.
So it could start with a request and an approval and an execution. It could start with, um, you know, uh, an assignment, of a
Yeah.
task, task reporting and update, and this kind of stuff. But basically, poor throughput is a business that you know is experiencing some issues somewhere, and a
Right.
COO who may not know where things are being held up.
Right.
That's
Right.
what gives them the nightmare, right? Is I'm not sure what's going wrong. I just know that the outcome is wrong,
Mm.
and the inputs were supposedly correct, right?
Right.
And that's when you start looking at, okay, what is your manual workflow? This is where you start really identifying inefficiencies and human error and spreadsheet chaos and all
Yeah.
those other kinds of things that we've talked about. Now, what a lot of COOs would do when they're looking at a system like Trinity is expect, okay, that should solve the throughput concerns. At the
Right.
very least, we can identify where the bottlenecks are, what's holding it up. And if not, what is holding up, who is holding it up?
Right. Right.
Okay. Now, a lot of employees might not like the idea of, Big Brother is watching,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But I actually see it as the opposite. Assessing whether somebody is performing correctly according to your standard, they might be performing perfectly fine. An opinion or emotion might lead you to believe that they're not,
Right.
right?
Right.
And they believe that they are. And it's very difficult to measure success when you don't actually have, a timing in there, when
Yeah.
you don't have an exception concept, when you don't have a documented workflow or a systemic workflow that can measure each stage and who did
Right.
what and when and where and why and how, right? It's very difficult to assess performance, especially when it comes to processes like purchasing or maintenance or even some of the simpler manufacturing processes.
Yeah.
And I think that putting in, I've found during implementations, it's a great way to get staff on board, right, in adopting the system, especially in greenfield sites that have nothing but manual processes.
Right.
They may be concerned, well, now, I'm being monitored. No, you're also being protected
Right.
because your hard work is very, very easy to see,
Right.
right? It's very easy to see how long it took you to approve the purchase request or to execute on a maintenance order or stuff like that. And
Yeah.
um, all it does is identify, the actual facts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um, the problem with that I see when people are bringing in a system that has a workflow engine like Trinity has
Yeah.
is they try to use the implementation as the opportunity at that exact time to renovate their business processes.
Yeah. And that
Um,
is coming from usually by experience. So it might be an intention and a purpose intention or as a plan, not
mhm.
usually. Um, Mostly is suggested, heavily suggested by the manufacturers. Manufacturer, I mean the software organization. It's like, oh, this is a way that you have to do things to be more efficient, or to control things, or to KPIs, etc.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's the other way around. So what are you doing today that software can help you really? But
Yeah.
which is a
That kind of, let's call it monolithic ERP. We don't need to
yeah,
name brands or anything like that.
right.
Very often that comes with some prescribed processes.
That's yeah,
Okay. Businesses think that prescription will basically cure what's wrong. Okay. Um, it will potentially solve some problems, but there's in implementing that way, there's the thing that I call the silent killer,
right.
right?
Okay,
Change management. Look, any kind of system adoption implementation, the biggest challenge and expense to the whole thing is change management.
right.
It's not the software itself, it's not the consulting, it's not the data. All of those are important, right? But it's how you manage change. It's change management, and that means your people, your processes, etc. And deciding to adopt two layers of change management at the same time, meaning not only am I going to introduce new software with all sorts of instruction and user training, but I'm also going to change the way people work.
Right.
That is, it's not the best approach, right? And with simpler processes, fine. And the very fact that they're using software now. But look, if you've got a purchasing process, for instance, right? The likelihood is somebody wants something, they fill out a form, it might be manual, it gets emailed,
Yeah.
it gets approved, it gets executed and goes to the supplier, and then you receive it, right?
Yeah.
How are you doing purchasing otherwise? So you already have human processes,
Yeah.
okay? Those human processes are the ones that you want to model first. You model those, then you're able to start understanding where the bottlenecks are and where
Right.
there's inefficiencies and where there's issues, where did it become overly complicated? And everything becomes transparent. Then you can start looking at the second level of change, which is altering the process.
Right. Right.
What I would be very, very careful about adding a prescribed process on top of system adoption.
Yeah. That
That
that's
that
so
that's a lot of change. That's a lot to digest for the users.
yeah, no, well, no wonder why we discussed last week about the
Yeah.
75% or even higher failure rates of these systems. And I think here is a clear explanation in more detail. So is two layers of changes happening at the same time is highly disruptive. So the adoption
I'd say
drop.
it's second place
Yeah,
to second place. The number one is the sales force making promises that
yeah,
the implementation team aren't able to keep.
yeah,
It's not always done on purpose. It's not, Machiavellian kind of thing. It's just it's easier to talk about something than to actually
yeah,
actively do it. But throughput, back to our main
yeah,
subject here, that throughput, um, that could be all of your business processes, right?
right,
And you want them to be efficient. You don't want uh, purchase to payment, that whole process, to take 90 days.
right,
You know, if you can't buy things or execute a purchase in a very short period of time, you've got a throughput problem in that process.
right, right.
right? You want to know the where and the how, what's going wrong, right? And that's what would keep the COO up at night. So what they really want to have is workflow. That's where workflow ever even came up. And it's no different than, human flow. It's just a simulation in the system of what people were doing anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. But now when you have a workflow engine, you get some cool benefits. Okay. One of them in Trinity, I don't know about all the other competing products, although, I can say that most of them don't have it. At every single stage of a workflow, you can declare that I want to measure that stage between
Yeah.
that stage and some previous stage. It doesn't have to be the one prior. It could be any prior stage of the workflow.
Yeah.
Okay. You could set a baseline and you can measure how long it's taking. You could determine on what calendar. Should it include weekends? Does
Yeah.
it include nighttime? That kind of stuff. But, you basically set it against a work schedule, your general office operating hours.
Right.
What you don't want is to believe that it takes you 4 days to do an approval when they received it on Friday morning and they approved it on a Monday night, right?
Right.
That's 2 days, not four. And so
Right.
you got to, these kinds of things. You want to make sure that it's measuring accurately your
Yeah.
throughput. Okay. And that's defined in those metrics for each and every stage of your workflow. If you want them, they're optional,
Yeah.
right? But it's very easy to say, well, this step should be measured against the request step,
Yeah.
right? And that could be completion. So from request to completion could be a time frame that you're interested in, or it could be from request to approval is
Right.
what I'm interested in. But I'm
Yeah.
going to track both of them to find out where is the bottleneck. Is it in the approval stage? Is it in the execution stage?
Yeah.
Is it in just the closure stage? So for instance, in a purchase, right? You have to close a purchase receipt, right? You've received all the stuff
Yeah.
and now you're waiting for invoice, but you didn't close it. So it's still sitting there open, waiting for additional
Yeah.
receipt. That's very simple ending step. There's very little consequence to that, but you want it really depends on the business and the specific workflow that you're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
Actually, that
The
so
biggest concern, sorry, by the way, the major concerns
yeah.
are in your customer facing processes. That's where
Yeah.
throughput can be a killer. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, that just you mentioned something that sparked my memory. I remember a case where the collection from so everyone has been agreed, contract signed, invoice sent, but the collection was very, very slow, so remarkably slow, and they didn't know why. And actually, because the system was sending automatically the invoices, but there was no follow-up by nobody. So they were
Yeah.
assuming they were assuming that the company would pay on time as agreed, but
Mm.
nobody was following up when that's delayed 1 day or 2 days or a week. Was no follow-up system. There was no metrics, so nobody could. Was no accountability from anybody to say, "Oh, this is a person responsible for follow up on collection." And this
Yeah.
company had I think 350 employees. So they had enough personnel to do that job. It's not something like
Yeah.
a small operation that everybody had to do everything and if somebody forgot. So they have a system to do all that to the point I have automated invoicing, but no
Yeah.
collections. In a quarter, I think they collected 500,000. Just doing just little tweak in saying why
Yeah.
we're having cash flow problems. We have all these invoices pending. I say, oh, look at this, it's pending for 90 days or 120 days. Nobody paid it.
Mm. Yeah, well, that brings in some additional features of the Trinity workflow
Right.
engine, by the way. Very convenient. Thanks, thanks for raising that. But at each stage, if you set a baseline, say let's just go with purchasing because it's the easiest one for everybody to understand. You've got a request and you've
Mm.
decided, well, I want all requests to be either rejected or approved within 48 hours. You set
Right.
that as your baseline. Okay. And then what? If it's not, then what? Well,
Yeah.
there's options in Trinity that You could decide, well, at that point, I'm going to send a reminder to the
Right.
approver. Okay.
All right.
So they received what'll happen is at the request stage, it'll create a task for the approver. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a task. It's in the task pool. There might be multiple qualified approvers, but that task is sitting out there. Okay. And then they didn't perform the task. It's on their task list, but they didn't do it. Okay. Fine. Then what do? You send a reminder, an alert. You got this task sitting here.
Yeah.
And then you also have the option, say another day goes by, to escalate.
Right. So there's a
So
layer.
now it's going to send an alert to the boss.
Yeah.
Right. This needs to be done. Like, that's up to the company to decide, should they escalate when something is not hitting the baseline,
Right.
when something has been assigned and reminded, and you could even have another reminder and another reminder. You could do that kind of thing, but that's not really very efficient. But at some point, you might choose to escalate.
Right.
And, that's the way it works in the human world. I gave you an instruction,
Yeah.
please do it in the next 48 hours. Okay, I will. 3 days go by and it's not done. You'll give them a reminder. Oh, by the way, did you do that thing? Can you please do it right now? Okay. Another day goes by and it's not done. You might want to escalate.
Yeah.
You might be like, hey, look, I'm talking to the boss. You need to get this stuff. It depends on how important it is to your business. But it's best to start with the way things are. Yeah. Right. And then you start applying all the little tools and tricks and improvements. You just need to have a workflow engine that is capable of as much change as people are.
Right.
Now, what do I mean by that? It can't be rigid. All right. You should be able to change a workflow on the fly. That once it's changed by a system administrator, at that point, the pathways through various workflows of all the objects associated would start to follow the new workflow.
Right.
Now, here's the interesting thing. That can lead to various consequences. If you change a workflow, right? Say you decided to add an additional approval step to a purchase order. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been requested. And before, it just used to be approved by somebody. Well, now I want to have operational approval, and then I want to have accounting approval before anybody goes and makes a commitment to the supplier. Okay. Right. 2 levels. Is it needed? Can we afford it? That's very common in larger organizations. Yeah. And what if you only had the one step of approval at some point? Okay. And the finance guys, well, I don't want to see any approvals unless it's already been operationally improved, right? So you actually want that in a single process. It's not branched, that it's going to 2 people for approval at one time.
Oh, right.
It's going linear, right? And so you decide, I'm going to, here's change management for you. I'm changing the way my business operates. I need the system to change with me. How long is this going to take? This would take you about 30 seconds in Trinity. This could take you weeks in some systems. It could take you quite a while. It could be very difficult sometimes. Why? Because the system needs to anticipate change management. It was something that I felt was very important. Businesses evolve, businesses change. Yeah. What are the consequences of changing a workflow? Well, if I introduce a new step, or I change the order of steps in a workflow, you can result in something that's called an orphan. Okay? Yeah. Meaning something is sitting at a status and it no longer has a way out. Oh, that's a disaster to a business, right? Or something, there's various other consequences that can come. But basically, our workflow engine will warn you if it has no way out. Now, if it is a final status, you actually tick a box and it won't warn you if it has no pathway out, because that's a finished status. Yeah. Like, it's rejected. Rejected is rejected. You could decide that rejected can be revised, but if you don't, if a rejection means it's done, then that's an end point of the process. and you don't want it setting up a flag that it's been orphaned.
Yeah.
Okay. But your workflow engine has to be about as intelligent as a simple elementary school like conversation about, what's the workflow now? Well, we've introduced these, 3 layers of approvals. What about the ones that are sitting at the old status waiting for the old approval?
Right. Right.
Oh, yeah. So what you would typically do in a case like that, if you didn't want to actually keep the naming conventions the same, is you would create a special step to bring objects at that status in line you click a button and they
Yeah.
move into the new workflow.
Right. Right.
It's just the thoughtful little things
Yeah.
that you want to put into the product so that you can change with the humans.
Right.
It's
Right.
basically like that. And so throughput being measured by this workflow engine, that workflow engine also has to be adaptable to multiple conditions, right?
Yeah.
That in one case, it goes one direction. In another case, it goes another direction. Approvals under $100 go to this guy, over $100 go to that guy, et cetera, et cetera. All these kinds of little things, the way it works in the real world, should
Yeah.
be possible to configure in the workflow engine.
So to reach that point where you're already operating and adapt and change as you need. So there's a right. The initial step is the right order to implement the system to throughput. Is a right sequence to do it that way. So then you have this capacity of flexibility and
Well,
agility
if
of agile, if you may.
agility, yeah. If they knew what all of the specific problems were,
Yeah.
they likely already would have changed the human process. So
Right.
the way I prefer to do it is not to go in and design new processes. Just ask them, how do you do it?
Yeah.
How do you do your purchases? Okay, those are the steps then. Now, if everybody's agreed and it's not going to cause too much change, it's not going to cause
Yeah.
additional stress while they're learning, how to use the software. Now, you
Yeah.
also want to teach them a new way to do purchasing. Um,
So that's
I like
interesting.
to
Sorry.
do it how it is
Yeah.
and then improve
Yeah.
it.
Right. 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 So that's the less friction and the most or the fastest way to implement the software. So
That's the fastest way. That's
right.
that's part of our speed. Well, let's set it up how you like to do it.
Right.
And then let's learn to take advantage of it. Let's identify bottlenecks. Let's add improvements. Let's measure things and let's set up
Right.
escalations and tasking and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great
And
because yeah, sorry.
yeah, that's the way, of course we have standard processes in Trinity, just like anybody else has
Yeah.
in their systems, in our demo environment and all that other kind of stuff. Purchasing is a pretty standard process. Maintenance execution is pretty standard. Incident management is a standard recommended process, et cetera, et cetera. So all those are kind of pre-configured,
Yeah.
but usually they're very, very close to the way the customer does things anyway when you go in.
Right.
So you don't have to you don't start from scratch. Let's have a committee on the best process for incident management. No, how do you manage incidents now? Well, we
Yeah.
don't have incident management. Yes, you do. It's a human process though.
Right. Right.
So let's turn that into a systemic process
Right.
and then we can add improvements to it. And that's
Right.
the way I prefer to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Much
And
easier, much
throughput,
faster.
there's where the COO has a little bit of assurance. First, you're going to, almost like digital twin the business, and
Yeah.
then you're going to identify where there's problems, or you'll definitely make some recommendations, but you don't want to start recommending that the way they do things changes at the same time that you're teaching them which buttons to click.
Right.
That's the silent killer, like I said. All of that stuff is going to come. All of that, if you have easy change management, you don't have to do it first. The
Yeah.
reason why it gets done, where new processes get introduced from the beginning, the reason that happens is because changing those processes is so onerous or expensive or difficult.
Yeah.
So you have to do all of this analysis first to decide what's going to be our ideal. Now let's write it in concrete because we don't want to have to change it later.
Yeah.
If you make change easy, then it's very easy to just go with the way things are, and then we can improve it.
Right. Right.
If you don't make change easy, then you have no choice but to design the optimal set during implementation.
Yeah.
And that's the silent killer. That's the double whammy. Learn all of these buttons. Also, we're changing. Oh, great. Yeah.
Right. No, actually, this is. I hope. This is great because actually that explains actually how why we have this 90 days risk-free implementation program, because actually this is doable, and because we are not
Yeah.
we are not reinventing the business. We are saying this is your business, okay, here it goes.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. When we decided to put together and make that commitment.
Yeah.
You know, you operate the way you operate. We can do that.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, you're going to want improvements to the way your business runs.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Is that you want the software in the user's hands as quickly as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
And then make improvement.
Right.
Better. Because you don't want to introduce, all the knows what they're doing. They don't know yet.
Yeah.
And it starts to become predictable. Predicting how long it's going to take to ask and receive. Great. Now let's configure it for improvement. Let's make sure that change is easily managed. And yeah, that follows on. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you very much for the clarification, because I think that this gives a flavor of the capacity, the Trinity capacity to do the things that we're committing to do, that probably no other vendor can provide that commitment to a CEO.
Yeah, it's a if then, right? We can't assume that your business has a problem with throughput in any process whatsoever.
Yeah.
But we can confirm, that it's good. And if it's not, we'll help you identify why not.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Right. I think I'm having slightly some connections problems, so I think actually we can wrap up now, because I don't want this call be cut in the middle without saying bye.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but thank you very much again. And we will have more interesting topics for next week call, because we are going to address all these sleepless nights that CEOs might have based on the research that we've done.
Great.
Perfect.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Bye.
See you next time, Fran.